Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eduyot. We are up to Perek Daled Mishnah Yud. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Chana Bad Miriam Sason ben Raya and Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam Began Eden Amen and Le'avdil ben Chaim Lechaim v'Derefua Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betor Shah Chole Yisrael and Achlama Me'erav Binyamin Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. This Mishnah cites 4 disputes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about various unrelated matters. The first, which also appears in Ketubot, chapter 5, Mishnah 6, is about a husband's obligation to satisfy his wife's conjugal needs. Hamadiret ishto mitashmish hamita, if one makes a vow that prevents his wife from engaging in marital relations. He said, the pleasure of your intimacy is forbidden to me. If he would have said it the other way around, the pleasure of my intimacy is forbidden to you, the vow would not take effect. For since a wife is entitled to her husband's intimacy, as says in Shemot chapter 21 verse 10, he cannot forbid it to her. But if he forbade her intimacy to him, the vow does take effect, even though the result is the same, that marital relations are prohibited. Bet Shammai amrim shtei shabbatot, Bet Shammai say that the limit is 2 weeks. Bet Hillel amrim shabbat echad, whereas Bet Hillel say that the limit is 1 week. If the vow prohibits marital relations for less than the stated limit, which is 2 weeks according to Bet Shammai and 1 week according to Bet Hillel, the wife cannot demand a divorce. But if the length of the prohibition exceeds the limit, she can demand a divorce and collect her ktubah. The ktubah is a document signed upon marriage that requires the husband to give the wife a sum of money, usually 200 zuz, when he divorces her or dies. The second dispute is found in Kiretut, chapter 1, Mishnah 6. After a woman gives birth or miscarries, she undergoes a period of tumah when marital relations are prohibited, followed by a period of tara when marital relations are biblically permitted even if she sees blood. If the child was a boy, the tameh period lasts 7 days and the tahor period lasts 33 days. If the child was a girl, the tameh period lasts 14 days and the tahor period lasts 66 days. After the tahor period, she brings a pair of offerings as stated in the book of Vayikra, chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. In the case of a girl, where the tahor period lasts 66 days, it is possible for the woman to conceive and miscarry a real fetus, one that is at least 40 days old during the tahor period. A woman who miscarries a fetus that is less than 40 days old is not obligated to bring the offerings. If a woman gives birth to a girl, in which case the tahor period is 66 days, it is possible for her to conceive again, bear the fetus for 40 days, and then miscarry before the tahor period ends. But if a woman gives birth to a boy, for whom the tahor period is just 33 days, there would not be enough time for her to conceive and miscarry a 40-day fetus. But in the event where it's a girl, where the tahor period lasts 66 days, and we said it's possible for the woman to conceive and miscarry a real fetus, one that is at least 40 days old during the tahor period, if that happens, she does not have to bring a second set of offerings. The offerings brought for the first birth or miscarriage are valid for the second one as well. If, however, the miscarriage occurred after the tahor period, a new set of offerings is required. The Mishnah discusses a miscarriage that took place on the night that follows the last day of the tahor period. Since the tahor period ends on the 80th day from birth, after 14 days of tumah and 66 days of tara, the following night is the night of the 81st day. Hamapelet le'or 81, if she miscarries during the night of the 81st day, Bet Shammai potrin men hakorban. Bet Shammai ruled that she is not obligated to bring a second set of offerings. Even in this case, the offerings for the first birth or miscarriage are valid for the second one as well, since she miscarried before it was possible for her to bring the offerings, because offerings are not brought at night. The miscarriage is treated as though it occurred within the tahor period and does not require its own set of offerings. But Bet Hillel ruled that she is obligated to bring a second set of offerings, because in fact the miscarriage took place after the tahor period ended. The third dispute concerns tzitzit, the fringes that must be attached to a four-cornered garment. The Torah commands that tzitzit include threads colored with a special blue dye known as tchelet. These blue threads have to be wool. Therefore, if the garment is made of linen, wearing it with tzitzit would violate the law of shatnez, which forbids one to wear a mixture of wool and linen. This is in Vayikra chapter 19 verse 19 and in Dvarim chapter 22 verse 11. According to biblical law, the mitzvah overrides the prohibition. Since tzitzit is a positive obligation while shatnez is a prohibition, we apply here the general rule, aseh dochelot aseh, a positive commandment overrides a negative one. Therefore, even a linen garment must have tzitzit attached to it. The Mishnah discusses how rabbinic law treats this situation. Sadin b'tzitzit, regarding the question of whether a linen cloak is subject to the mitzvah of tzitzit. Bet Shammai potrin, Bet Shammai ruled that it is exempt from the mitzvah, therefore it is forbidden to attach tchelet to a linen garment, for since there is no mitzvah, the prohibition of shatnez takes effect. According to Bet Shammai, the rabbis decreed that tzitzit may not be attached to a linen garment because they were concerned that someone might wear the garment at night when the mitzvah of tzitzit does not apply and thereby violate the prohibition of shatnez. Wearing a linen garment with woolen tchelet at night is biblically prohibited, since at night there is no mitzvah of tzitzit that would override the prohibition of shatnez. To prevent people from committing the transgression of shatnez in this way, the sages forbade attaching tchelet to a linen garment. Bet Hillel mechayvin, but Bet Hillel ruled that a linen cloak is subject to the mitzvah of tzitzit, which is in fact the biblical law, because they maintain that the rabbis made no such decree. The fourth dispute, which appears in Maasrot chapter 4, Mishnah 2, is about tevel, produce of Eretz Yisrael from which the required tithes to Umot Maasrot have not been separated. Eating tevel is forbidden. However, produce does not attain the status of tevel until the owner becomes obligated to tithe it. Ukbal maaser. Before then, one may eat some of the produce as a snack, though not as part of a regular meal. Various circumstances make produce subject to the tithing obligation. One of these circumstances is Shabbat, meaning produce becomes subject to a tithing obligation at the start of the first Shabbat after it is fully processed. So processed produce may not be eaten on that first Shabbat or later, even as a snack, unless it is tithed first. The scripture states in Yeshaya chapter 58, verse 13, "You shall call Shabbat a delight," which teaches that one should eat and drink on Shabbat. Since eating on Shabbat is called a delight, a snack on Shabbat is as important as a proper meal on a weekday. It is therefore prohibited to eat untithed produce on Shabbat, even as a snack. Once Shabbat begins and the food becomes prohibited, it remains prohibited even after Shabbat. Our Mishnah considers whether designating produce for consumption on Shabbat makes it subject to a tithing obligation even before Shabbat begins. Kalkalat Shabbat, a basket of fruit that one has designated to be eaten on Shabbat. Bet Shammai Putrin, Bet Shammai ruled that it does not become subject to a tithing obligation until Shabbat begins. One may therefore eat it as a snack before Shabbat without separating the tithes. Or Bet Hillel mechayvin, but Bet Hillel ruled that it becomes subject to the tithing obligation as soon as it is designated. Therefore, even before Shabbat, it may not be eaten at all unless it is tithed first. According to Bet Hillel, once a person designates food for Shabbat, he does not usually change his mind and decide to use it for any other purpose. Therefore, the very act of designation is enough to raise the food to the level of Shabbat food. And that is at a Mishnah Yud. The next dispute, Mishnah Yud Aleph, which is also recorded in Nazir chapter 3, Mishnah 6, is about a Nazir. This is someone who makes the vow of Nezirut, which prohibits him from cutting his hair, drinking wine, or eating any part of a grape, and becoming tameh from a corpse. He must observe these laws for 30 days unless his vow specified a longer term. A Nazir who is already tameh at the time he makes his vow cannot begin observing his term of Nezirut until he becomes tahor. The rabbis decreed that all lands outside of Eretz Yisrael are considered tameh, and a person who is standing on such lands or touches soil from them becomes tameh as if he touched a corpse. This is known as the tumah of the land of the nations. The rabbis decreed this because of the practice of the non-Jewish nations to bury their dead in unmarked graves anywhere, not just in cemeteries. Therefore, any land outside of Eretz Yisrael might have corpses or part of corpses buried in it. This tumah is rabbinic. Under biblical law, we do not suspect that any area contains a corpse unless we know that a corpse was buried there. Therefore, if a person who is outside Eretz Yisrael accepted upon himself a term of Nezirut, he cannot fulfill his Nezirut obligation there. Rather, he is obligated to travel to Eretz Yisrael, immediately purify himself from his tumah, and observe his term of Nezirut in Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah teaches the law for someone who observed his entire term of Nezirut outside Eretz Yisrael, and only then came to Eretz Yisrael. Mishna Yomi Nezirut merubah. If someone who accepted upon himself a long term of Nezirut, more than the standard 30 days, while he was outside Eretz Yisrael, Vishlim Neziruto v'achar ba'al haaretz, and he completed his term of Nezirut there, and only afterward came to Eretz Yisrael, how many days must he observe again? Instead of fulfilling the rabbinic requirement to go to Eretz Yisrael and observe his term of Nezirut there, he observed the entire term outside Eretz Yisrael in a state of rabbinic tumah. The rabbis therefore penalized him and required him to observe Nezirut again in Eretz Yisrael after his purification. The Tanaim disagree about how many days of Nezirut he must observe in Eretz Yisrael. Bet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai say, Nazir 30 Yom, he must be a Nazir for 30 days, since the Tumah of the land of the nations is only a rabbinic Tumah. He fulfilled his biblical obligation when he observed this term of Nazirut outside Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, the rabbis penalized him by requiring him to be a Nazir again for a standard 30-day term. It's not necessary, however, for him to repeat the full length of his original term. But Bet Hillel say Nazir Batchila, he must be a Nazir as at the beginning of his term, meaning he must observe a term of Nazirut in Eretz Yisrael for the length of time he originally vowed to observe. According to Bet Hillel, the rabbis penalized this Nazir by treating him as if he did not observe his Nazirut at all, since he observed it outside Eretz Yisrael. The next dispute appears in Nazir chapter 2, Mishnah 7. If someone has two sets of witnesses testifying about him, the first set of witnesses testified that he accepted upon himself 2 terms of Nazirut, 2 standard 30-day terms of Nazirut or 60 days. And the second set of witnesses testify that he accepted upon himself the 5 terms of Nazirut, 150 days. The Mishnah discusses a case where the witnesses all testify regarding the same moment in time. If they testified about 2 different times, the person would be obligated to observe 7 terms of Nazirut, 2 for the vow he made at one point in time according to the first set of witnesses, and 5 for the separate vow he made at another point in time according to the second set of witnesses. But back to our case, if you have these 2 groups disagreeing about the same moment in time, and he claims that he did not vow at all, Bet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai say, Nechleka Eduyot, the testimony is divided, meaning both testimonies are tossed out, since the 2 sets of witnesses contradict each other, and the court has no way of knowing which is telling the truth. Ven kan Nazirut, therefore there is no Nazirut obligation here. When 2 sets of witnesses contradict each other, neither of their testimonies is accepted. The person who is being testified about remains with his own claim that he did not vow at all, and does not have to observe any terms of Nazirut. Bet Hillel Omrim, but Bet Hillel say Yesh Bichal Chamesh Time, included in 5 terms is 2 terms of Nazirut, meaning that since all the witnesses agree that he accepted at least 2 terms of Nazirut, a testimony about 2 terms is considered valid. Shiyeh Nazir Shtaim, therefore the law is that he must be a Nazir for 2 terms. Although he denies ever vowing to be a Nazir, we have the valid testimony of 2 witnesses that he did accept at least 2 terms, even if we do not know which set of witnesses is telling the truth. The court can therefore require him to observe 2 terms in Nazirut. The testimony about the other 3 terms, however, which is contradicted by the other witnesses, is disregarded, and he does not need to observe them. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.